Thanks for tuning into the Financial Empowerment Charlas. I'm Tanya, co-founder of Snowball Wealth, and
I'm Natalie Torres Haddad, aka Financially Savvy Latina.
And today we're going to be talking about debt management. Specifically, we're going to go deep into two topics, credit card debt and student debt. So, Natalie, let's talk first about our personal stories, and then we're going to get into some of the high-level stats. What's your student debt and credit card debt story?
So many of us wish we didn't have one. Unfortunate for me, I did. I had a lot of student debt and credit card debt combined. As a first-generation college student, which we talked about in the other episode, it was very difficult managing not only my money, but not having enough money. I was relying on my credit cards, which was a big mistake. And not having enough income to pay off that debt every month was something that unfortunately made me accrue so much debt. So when I graduated from undergrad and then my master's, I had accumulated about $40,000 in debt. A little than half of that was credit card debt, and not understanding that credit card debt was high interest. It wasn't forgiving. It wasn't like I had a 6-month grace period if I couldn't pay it, like with my student loan. So it was a lot of frustration, difficulty, and I still get a little tense when I think about it because it also took many years to pay it off. And I know most people that are dealing with student debt, it's not something that will go away in a year, especially if they find themselves in 5-figure, almost 6-figure debt, dealing with higher education. So for me, it was a long journey. It wasn't an easy one, but it was something that I felt it was doable in the end, but many times I felt like it was never going to end. Yeah. And I think that's why this is such an important chat that we're going to have, because I think many of us can relate to my story. What was yours similar? Was it, some student debt or both?
Yeah. I definitely took out about $30,000 in student debt. I actually only went to school for 3 years and I went to community college during high school so that I wouldn't have more student debt. Right. And I still graduated with $30,000 in student debt. And I had a little bit of credit card debt, but it wasn't too bad because I had worked all throughout college. And granted, and I also relate to everyone out there that feels that this is unfair. I felt like it was really unfair too. I was working full time while I was going to college, tutoring and working on campus and working at restaurants. And so I felt like I really hustled and tried my hardest, and I still came out with debt.
And you probably would have had more, right?
And I would have had much more if I had gone the full 4 years, and if I had, which I really wanted to go the full 4 years. I didn't get to graduate with my friends because I was feeling anxious about the debt and wanted to get to work right away. And so for me, student debt feels personal. Yeah, absolutely. And the student debt crisis feels personal. That's one of the main reasons why I started Snowball, the company that I started. But yeah,
others, right? Because I think I was in the same boat. I worked full time too, and going to grad school too, that really took a toll. And the credit card itself, it wasn't like we took a class beforehand. This is why I'm excited we're doing this, having this conversation on what to avoid, what pitfalls, but how we can really prevent credit card debt along with student debt. Because working full time, I even got scholarships, and I still had that much debt. So I know it's something that we need to really hone down and educate people on it as well, because it's kind of we don't want to feel ashamed by it. We also don't want to feel that it's going to stagnate everything that our life future or what our future should look like. So understanding that we can do better with that.
Yeah, and also that you're not alone. So a few quick stats. There's 44 million Americans with student debt, and there's 1.7 trillion outstanding. And what's also interesting is that 2/3 of student debt's owned by women. Oh, yes. So the majority of student debt's owned by women. And also,
we make less money.
And you make less money, so we hold it for longer.
Yeah, exactly.
And Black and Latinx communities also suffer the most and take out more debt than our white counterparts. So that's another.
It's an alarming statistics. If we look at the broad, those that graduate from college, it's that they also feel 70%, over 70% feel they don't know how to manage their debt, let alone manage their money. And so knowing that, you're not alone in this. It's just kind of what resources are available to you, what you can start doing now to have a different future, right? Right. That's what really changes everything.
Yeah, absolutely. So how did you start tackling your credit card debt? I can't imagine. So did you do your credit card debt first and then your student debt, or how did you start thinking about it?
Yes, so luckily I did know that my credit card debt needed to be paid off first, because most credit cards usually have higher interest rate as opposed to student loans, right? And they also don't have, well, at least with student loans, you have the grace period, you have different, preventative things that you can do. But with the credit card debt, I wanted to make sure I tackled on with the highest interest rate, because I knew no matter how much money I was putting down, maybe on one that had a lower balance, the interest rate was the one that was killing me. So little by little, I had to tackle the first, and then I had multiple credit cards. So, it's not necessarily you're just stuck with one credit card. It's like trying to keep an eye on all four if they're due on different dates, and what the minimum amount is. And obviously I tried paying more than the minimum, because I thought that was the fastest way to make sure not only I paid off faster, but I felt like it was this discipline that all of a sudden, if I paid off the first card, that payment that was going towards the first card, I ended up applying it to the second one. And so it was something that it took time. There was times where I was like, I can't do this anymore. I felt like, okay, I'm just gonna have to always have debt. So it definitely was a patience on me, but also asking for some help. And that took me a while to get to. I didn't really ask anyone for help because I was afraid. And this is why we're doing these conversations, because we don't want people to feel that they're alone in this.
And one thing that I found to be helpful that I didn't learn until later is like, what is a high interest? So what's a high interest for your credit card? What's a high interest for your student debt? Do you want to share a little bit?
So it all depends. Back to your credit score. On the first episode, we talked a little bit about that. But the higher the credit score you have, the better interest you'll get, right? So, I mean, we could see credit cards anything above 14%. I've seen up to 28%, which is it's just ridiculous to think that that's, maybe something that you thought you're going to spend $100 on. It's like, really, is it really worth it that you're going to be paying how much more, if you're more than $20 on that $100?
And it's always in the fine print.
Oh, yeah.
It's always in the fine print.
Always. So it's definitely understanding that the lower interest, and then the buying power we have too, we can negotiate the interest rate. That's one way that really helped me pay down my credit card as well, as far as letting people know that, there's certain things that you can do to advocate for yourself and say, I need to pay this off, or I want to be able to purchase something else. How do I lower my interest rate, or how to make sure I'm never late on my credit card? That was huge for me, because I hear a lot of students, especially when I'm working with them, that they're like, well, I can't afford to pay this month, but next month I'm going to double my payment so it'll make up for that. And I'm like, no, that's the first thing you don't want to do. You want to make sure you're always consistent, even if it's just the minimum amount. If you can't pay it off in 1 month, I get that, but making sure you do a little bit of both. I guess what advice do you normally give people when you're going across that?
Well, I was shocked to see that I've seen interest rates for student debt as high as 18%. And so some people, when they take out student loans, even if it's from the federal government, they are getting higher interest rates. So it's just important to know what a high interest rate is. So I usually say a rule of thumb is anything above 6% is high interest.
Right.
And you should do that first.
Yes.
Like no matter what. And then, that might be credit card debt, that might be a student loan, but anything above 6% is considered high interest and pretty risky, because then it's easy to see it begin to balloon. And, one day it's $100 and another day it's, months later, years later, it ends up being much, much higher. So,
and so you recommend people too that they're paying their credit card first before their student loans, because I'm sure the different benefits from it.
Yeah. So in debt management, there's usually two methods that people use: the Avalanche method and the Snowball method. And my preference is actually the Avalanche method, which is paying off the highest interest rate first. And so when I think about a debt payback plan, I usually have someone just list it out, even if it's on a piece of paper, all of their debt. And then you can move it into a spreadsheet or move it into an app. But first, like putting it down on a piece of paper, like all of the credit, like the debt that you have outstanding, and like what the interest rate is next to it and how much it is. And then from there, looking at the highest interest rate first and then tackling that.
It's like that list checkoff sheet you have, right? It's kind of that, let's say you have 5 different credit cards and then 2 different student loans, just seeing it on paper, when it becomes real. And for me, I always like tell people, like, put it somewhere you're going to see it often to remind yourself, like, what is it that you're working towards?
Right.
And you can check it off when you're like, paid off that one credit card and celebrate with that, right? Because I think half of the time we forget that we should celebrate some of our little wins, right?
And then also I think that something that I always share with our users or people that I coach is that sometimes the federal rates can be higher than what's available in the private market. So you can actually refinance your student loans. You can also get a personal loan out for your credit card debt. So those are 2 options that you have too. So if you have this debt that's outstanding, just know that you don't have to just keep paying it off with the same exact interest.
One. Right.
Yeah, you can refinance or you can get a better interest rate, and that really helps just reduce some of that stress too. Just knowing that at least the interest rate is lower, so it's not increasing as quickly.
And a lot of common questions that you ask me is like, how early on should I look at if I decide to do consolidation or debt management? How early do you tell people it's like, when is the time to look at their other options if they have other options?
I mean, I feel like it's never too early, at least to just know your options, right? Like, it doesn't mean that you have to make a decision, but at least just exploring what those options are so that you have all of the information.
Right.
My big thing is more information. The more information that you have, the better decisions you can make.
Exactly.
So at least knowing what your options are, I think is really important.
And there's less stress that comes with that too when you know that you can lower those interest rates, or how you can negotiate something that would be able to help you pay it faster, right? So just even looking at the timeline, let's say you do have that list of the 5 credit cards to say, it's going to take me 2 years to pay this off. That's something my husband and I talked about where people are, they're like, how long did it take you? And we're like, it took us 14 years to pay off. And we both went to grad school on top of that. So I think sometimes when people are a little bit more realistic about the time that it might take, how much money you have to put aside a month. I mean, that was the first conversation we had, I think, on our second date, where it's like, I don't have a lot of money because I have at least $500 that's going through my student loans. And he was like, I'm on the same boat. So I think when you start having that conversation early on with your friends, with your family, right, having that, I think that's one way to really help tackle your student debt, because people assume just because you do well, if we get good jobs, higher education, that you're earning maybe six figures, but chances are maybe you have just as much debt. So having that conversation, opening up, saying, I might need some help along the way, or at least your support, maybe not necessarily financially, can help pay some of that debt down. Yeah.
And also, for one thing that I do want to share too is that graduate school debt is more expensive than undergraduate or school debt. And so actually the federal interest rates are higher just because you're in a graduate program. Right. So that's important to know as you're deciding, should I do grad school or not? And if you are going to do grad school, you also have an option to say no to some loans. So you can, so knowing that you don't have to take out all of the loans that they're giving you, just because they're offering it to you doesn't mean you have to take them. And also there's no grace period. There's some loans that don't, there's a difference between subsidized and unsubsidized loans.
Yes.
An unsubsidized loan means that you start accruing interest right away. So say that you have, to make it easy, $10,000 loan at a 10% interest rate, you start paying interest day one.
Jeez.
And then a subsidized student loan is you take out a $10,000 loan. The interest doesn't start accruing until 6 months after you graduate. Or it depends on the grace period. Double check your grace period. Right. But there's a grace period after you graduate, but you don't accrue interest while you're in school, which is huge, especially if you're in a longer program. That can make a big difference.
Rule of thumb is that you want to pay your unsubsidized first.
Yeah.
Okay. So with credit cards, or do you ever feel with that you're paying off something quickly, but if you have an option to negotiate a better rate? Okay.
That's right.
So what is it that you tell them? Like, how do you say, hey, can you give me a better interest rate? What is it that you normally deal with the companies? What do you normally say to them?
So I usually tell people to call or use the live chat and talk to the credit card companies directly and ask them, because it's free to ask,
right?
And and a lot of people don't always take advantage of that. And so just knowing that you can ask, you can also ask for a higher credit limit, and that also helps your credit score, because then the way that your credit score is calculated, a third of it's about utilization, which means like how much. So if you have $100,000 credit limit and you're using, 80,000 of it, that means you're using 80%.
Yeah.
You're using the majority. But if you have 100,000 in limit and you're only using 20, then your credit, you have a better credit score, and that's better for your credit.
And that's why I tell people, like, keep it under 30% usage. So for those that are like, how should I make sure I handle this? Maybe 5,000, 10,000 is your limit. Make sure you never go above that 30%, because one, that'll help boost up your credit. You're paying it down as much as you can. Rule of thumb is if you can pay it off at the end of the month, do it.
Yeah.
But if you can't pay more than the minimum, and just continue to do that, right? Because it all is habitual. It all is something about keeping that discipline. But yeah, it's not easy.
No.
But getting this type of help, and obviously resources like this, knowing that you can call up the companies that you're working with and find out what apps work for you too, the type of resources. I think that's something that many of us sometimes feel when we're trying to figure out how do we get out of it. It's not just like creating the budget like we talked about in the previous podcast, but how is it that you can really tackle it down in the quickest way, and one that'll keep you sane, right? Because you don't want to go crazy over the whole aspect of it.
Yeah, but I also want to talk about how money is emotional, right?
Yes,
money is emotional. Debt especially is emotional, and I think that there's a lot of shame around debt. Maybe less so about student debt, but more about credit card debt. There's just a lot of shame around it, and I just, how do you think about? Did you feel shame when you had credit card debt?
Absolutely.
How did you work through that?
I always think about how emotionally draining it was. So when people talk about debt, it's more, it also has a lot to deal with the strain it has on you physically, emotionally, and it was this depression I was feeling. I had no idea I was depressed, and it was what came first, and it was the sleepless nights, the constant worrying that I didn't have enough to make ends meet, and then let alone pay additional payments on my student loans and credit card debt. And the shameful feeling was kind of, people automatically assume that you're more educated, that you have it handled, if you have a good career, that you're, but it's still kind of something that you need support, right? And so dealing with my own feelings and working with other people, and I see how they deal with stress, it's all related to their finances and the emotional relationship we have with it. It's, I think, by far one of the most powerful relationships we have. How we deal with money, how we manage it, whether are we saving it, are we spending it, are we donating, what is it that we're doing with it? Have you encountered something like that for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that for me, when I had I think I mentioned in the last podcast, I had credit card debt when I was 18, and I felt like I was drowning in it. For me, it was really emotional and shameful too. Like, I didn't know who I could talk to. I didn't even tell my parents.
Yeah.
And I was 18, I was still. So,
it's a cultural thing too. Sometimes, our society, it teaches in our culture not to talk about money. Right. It's a taboo, even though it shouldn't be. We learn from our mistakes, right?
Right. And I think for me, it was the feeling that I didn't have control.
Yes.
And so I think that when I give people advice on how to start tackling their debt, it's about how do you regain control and how do you feel in control again.
Yeah.
And so for me, I think, and for people that I help advise, or I give advice to, I tell them, start with just listing it out and just knowing that anything can be solved, right?
Yes.
It's not going to be, you're here today, but you can be in a different position next year.
Yeah.
And it's, for me, and what I always say is just progress over perfection. You're not going to be perfect overnight, but just take the first step to make progress towards it.
Right. And have something in mind that'll help you want to reach it. People, I always say, what do you want to do? I want to pay off all my debt. Well, are you really going to want to get out in the morning and go to work? And the days that you don't want to work, is that really going to get you out of bed? For me, it's, I always say, have a picture or have some type of image that reminds you, maybe one day I want to go on a vacation, or I want to spend some time, in a different place with my family. That's going to make you want to work towards your goal to pay off that debt sooner. Yeah. So having that kind of that reminder of what you're working towards, because it is something that's not done overnight. Right?
Yeah.
And keeping that. But I like that. You say progress. It's not about being perfect.
Right. And it's about regaining control. So what's your number one tip for getting out of debt?
My number one tip is start small. It's taking those little bites. You can't necessarily tackle the entire, whether you have 10 different items that you're paying down, credit card, student loan, personal loans, whatever it might be. Start off with the one with the highest interest rate and taking that one bite at a time and knowing that it will go down and eventually it will go away.
Yeah. I think that for me, my number one tip is making sure that you are a master of your budget. So we gave some tips on budgeting in the last episode, but I think that really making sure that you know how much money is coming in, how much money is coming out, and how much money you can allocate towards your debt. And if you can make some adjustments to some of that runaway money that you were talking about.
You're like, we're staying in tonight, we're not going to the movies. You know, that money's going to go towards my debt.
Yeah. The problem with paying off debt is that it doesn't always feel good.
No.
And so, because it doesn't feel like you're getting anything from it.
Right.
But I think that if you start shifting your mindset to saying, okay, I'm going to get out of debt, and that getting out of debt's going to feel good.
Yes. Celebrate the wins.
Yeah, celebrate the wins. Yeah, you have to celebrate every win.
I just remember seeing this meme that it was, this lady had a party for her just paying off her student debt.
Oh,
and I'm like, why don't we celebrate that? And it's like, hey, I paid off a credit card today. Give myself a high five, or let people know, hey, I've increased my credit score because of this. So
give yourself a little treat.
Yeah, because then you want to continue to do it.
Yeah.
So if you got to throw a party, invite us, and we'd be happy to join you to celebrate that too.
And there's a lot of online resources. We'll be sharing them on HispanicHeritage.org. So visit there for links, and we'll be sharing some apps that we think are interesting, and also there'll be a full video of this podcast there too. So thank you so much for tuning in to this Financial Empowerment Charla. This is the second of a 3-part series brought to you by Nationwide and the Hispanic Heritage Foundation.